Hi there. This is Chapter 10 in Navigating Early by Clare Vanderpool, and just a fair warning, this is a slightly longer chapter. In the last days of August and beginning weeks of September, I went to class and worked on the boat with Early. The other boys continued to have crew practice, and I told Mr. Blaine I'd catch up as soon as my boat was ready. He didn't seem to mind that I hadn't shown up yet. Maybe he felt responsible for my initial humiliation and didn't want a recurrence of me falling in the bay. I still saw the other boys in class and around the dorm, but ever since that night in Sam and Robbie Dean's dorm room and the talk of the fish, the awkwardness lingered like the empty space on one of Early's records. It whirled in circles, making it hard to jump back in. Those after-school hours blended together with the sounds of Frank Sinatra, Glenn Miller, Louis Armstrong, Mozart, and Billie Holiday, depending on the day and the weather. Sometimes Early and I listened to shows on the radio: The Lone Ranger, Buck Rogers, Jungle Jim, and Captain Midnight. There was also local news of the roamings of the Great Bear still terrorizing wayfarers on the Appalachian Trail. The bounty was up to $750. One night, we listened in reverent silence as the voice on the radio crackled over the airwaves, announcing the official surrender of Japan on the USS Missouri. The war was over. We could hear whoops and hollers from boys outside, but Early and I continued our work without speaking, filled with our own thoughts about the war. In fact, I think Early and I both enjoyed those times of quiet when we worked in silence, listening only to the croaking of Bucky the Frog and our own thoughts. I thought I knew a thing or two about woodworking. I even bragged to Early about having built a soapbox car before, but Early was much more skilled. As the afternoon light spilled in through the basement windows, we worked at disassembling the sweetie pie, stripping layers of varnish, and repairing splits. Early showed me how to mix a matching sawdust with resin to give a more uniform color under the varnish. We spent several days on the oars, repairing cracks in the blades, painting them blue with white stripes, and sanding the wooden shaft and handle for a smooth finish. The bones of the sweetie pie were sound, and after we'd knocked off all the rotten parts and rough edges, the bones were about all that was left. The only wood we had available was whatever we could find in the workshop or in the boathouse. There were hodgepodge pieces of maple and oak and a little mahogany for the trim. The Morton Hill Regatta was 4 weeks away. I had pretended that I wasn't interested. After all, rowing a boat wasn't a real sport. But as the days went by and my hands sanded, carved, bent, caulked, blew, glued, and fastened every inch of the sweetie pie, I felt the stirrings of something familiar, the spirit of competition. Back home, we competed over everything. There was always some contest of strength, speed, endurance, or will. There were the usuals: baseball, running, swimming, although the contest didn't have to be a real sport. We'd spar over who could climb the fastest, hit the hardest, hide the longest, and spit the furthest. But ever since that day in July by the creek, the last day my mom had frizzy hair, I'd lost interest. I gave up my spot on the baseball team, quit going swimming, and pretty much left it up to somebody else to do the climbing, hiding, and spitting. Unfortunately, I found I was still pretty good at hitting. Melvin Trumbull and I were tired and sweaty after a day of baling hay at his grandpa's farm. All he'd said was that he was hungry and couldn't wait to go home and have some of his mom's homemade biscuits and gravy. But how could he talk so casually about his mom when I no longer had one? I'm not proud of it, but I hauled off and hit him right in the face. The worst was when he said he deserved it. I'm ashamed to say I almost cried. I wished I'd apologized before I left. But here it was, September, and something had come over me. I think it started the day I ran that portion of the steeplechase. Once my legs and arms started pumping, something else in me started pumping too. I wasn't sure if it came from sadness or anger or the need to punch someone in the face, but now, with the sweetie pie looking pretty sweet, I knew I wanted to compete in the regatta, and I wanted to win. Early talked a lot while we were in the workshop. Most of what he said began with, "Did you know? Did you know that the regatta was originally a gondola race on the canals of Venice? Did you know that Maine is the only state name with one syllable? Did you know that hippopotamus milk is pink?" Interesting, but exhausting. He'd also explained things about boat building. The proper positioning of the wooden seat in relation to the clogs to give enough room for someone my height to take a full stroke without straining his back. The importance of keeping the oars level and positioned at the proper angle. He spent a good deal of time working out equations on the chalkboard to figure out the best ratio for this and the appropriate span for that. It was the end of September, 2 weeks before the regatta, and Early was perfecting the lubricant for greasing the tracks. The regatta is the kickoff for fall break week, Jackie. October starts to get cold in the mornings. I got castor oil from the infirmary so the seat tracks can slide easily in the cooler air. I watched as he used a clean rag, applying the oil to the tracks below the 8-wheeled seat. "Try it," he said. I took my place on the seat, put my feet in the laced clogs, and pumped back and forth a few times. "Smooth," I said. "Let's take her out for a test run." Early and I carried the boat up the stairs and out into the open air. She was surprisingly light. My last venture in the sweetie pie had been such a failure that I was a little nervous about trying again, until we lowered her onto the water. The shiny wooden hull barely made a ripple as it settled to rest, sleek and fine, by the dock. Yes, the sweetie pie looked as yar as they come, and she seemed to enjoy her own reflection in the glassy water. "Get in the boat, Jackie." I got in the boat. "Start rowing." I started rowing, and rowing, and rowing. That day, the next day, and the day after that. I was on the water before sunrise until the bell rang for morning chapel. Then I was out on again after school until sunset. My muscles ached all over again, at first rebelling with every stroke, keeping me awake at night and screaming at my audacity to want to do ordinary things like walk or sit. I wandered around in a perpetual fog of Early's smelly ointment. As the days went by and the pain subsided, Early praised my strong, smooth strokes that propelled me through the water. But navigating was a problem. I couldn't row a straight course. "You need a coxswain." "Coxswain?" I repeated the word as he pronounced it. "The person who guides and navigates the boat. The sweetie pie is a double, and since we took out one of the seats for you to row it as a single, we can fit in a coxswain seat instead. You need someone to give you direction." My pride bristled a little, but maybe he was right. I had not proven myself an able oarsman yet, and much as I would have liked to be in control of my own race, I knew I was still a little wobbly on the water. Early went to the nook, then returned with a small leather seat that he attached to the back of the boat. We had to do some jury rigging to get the coxswain seat to sit right in the sweetie pie, but Early eventually settled his little body on board, and we started out again. This time he called out directions, like "firm up," meaning apply more pressure where needed, and "picket," meaning use only the arms to make a turn. One thing I learned about Early was that he never doubted his authority, as he called, "Square on the ready, check it down, power 10, slow the slide, way enough." It took time to learn what the commands meant, and even longer to respond to them, but eventually I followed his direction and began to stay on course. Out on the bay, when the sun would inch lower upon the western woods, Early, in a quieter voice, would give the command, "Let it run," meaning stop rowing, oars out of the water, and glide to a stop. Here we would rest, taking in the last warmth of the day. And Early would tell me his number story, the story of Pie and his adventures. Sometimes I worried a little about the strangest of boys. If he could let go of even a little of his strangeness, he might not be such an outsider. But then, who was I to talk? I remembered the headmaster's advice to me when I'd first arrived at Morton Hill Academy. If you want to sit with a group in the lunchroom, they'll probably let you. If you want to go off and sit by yourself, they'll probably let you do that too. I had positioned myself apart from the table, apart from the group, and I let myself drift away as Early told his story. So, on to Early's next part of his story, the citizen of the world. As Pi continued his journey, he respected the power of the sea and always kept the great bear in his sight to guide him. His journey took him to many distant shores, where he encountered the people of the world. The members of the light-skinned tribe on the cold rocky shore were small and meek. They set out baskets of food in front of their huts of animal hide, but would not look at him. On the shores of the bluest waters, he found houses built of clay and brick instead of branches and leaves. The villagers wore tunics and sandals and engaged him in dialogues and debates. They asked him questions he had never thought of. What is more important, the soul or the mind? Are we responsible for each other or only ourselves? Is there such thing as mystery or only that which is not yet understood? Pi enjoyed his time with these great philosophers, the thinkers he called them. But the food was not good, and after a time his head began to ache. He was relieved to say his farewells and enjoy the solitude of his boat. His shortest stay was on an island in the choppy waters to the west, where the sun beat down on hot sand and left so little moisture that nothing could grow. Pi realized that water must be essential not only for life but for happiness as well, because while he was met with open arms, those arms were throwing spears and rocks. He made a hasty retreat and took away only bruises and cuts as mementos of his visit. His favorite people were those of the lush region off the calm coastal waters. They were big, loud, and boisterous, and after welcoming him into their village with a banquet of savory meats, sweet fruits, and spiced ales, they celebrated his friendship for weeks and nearly refused to let him leave. But he did leave. After all, he was not looking for a new home. He already had a home. He was a voyager, a navigator, one who keeps plotting a course and finding his way. He was still finding his way. It's the end of chapter 10. I'll be back soon with chapter 11 for you. Have a great day.